Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, Ben.
So, when we were kids growing up in the mid to late 90s, video games cost money, right?
I remember some of that.
But nowadays, the prevailing model is freemium, which is, no cost up front, but there are typically other things in the game that'll cost you. And they
Hmm.
rely on a certain percentage of people ponying up
Hmm.
to make it a worthwhile endeavor.
Yeah, yeah.
So my first question is to you, nowadays, does a gaming's pricing strategy, free versus paid, does that affect your perception of quality of how good the game will be?
That's an interesting question. That's it's hard to give a straight answer to that, but I
Yeah.
can just give thoughts off the cuff. Um, I remember when Genshin Impact was making that just blast over, like you were hearing about the game everywhere, and it looked like a cool game, and I downloaded it. I haven't I haven't even opened it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
that
I've
was
had
probably a
I've had a
year.
few of those myself where yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a year and a half ago, and it's something like, and so okay, I'm a Nintendo Switch gamer. I'm a pretty casual one. I'm not a I'm not a super great gamer. Like I'm pretty proud of how far I've gotten in Celeste. Um, but they don't make that game impossible. They just make it difficult, and
Right.
and the game teaches you how to play it as you go. So like I enjoy a challenge as long as it's one I can rise to.
It's interesting because that's a paid game, right?
Yeah,
So they're incentivized, at least on some level, to make the game enjoyable and to give you a workable path through it.
yeah, yeah,
Whereas a lot of the freemium games that come out, they're designed more to keep you in the game and keep you grinding. So it's
yeah, yeah.
kind of a perverse incentive for the people designing the games. They're not so much designing games as they are trying to like design behavior, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Um, what a funny thing. Okay, you'll remember because we were kids together
Yeah.
and your sister had this game. I like I remember my first look at Harvest Moon 64. I thought, wow, this is like a game for preschoolers.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And then I actually played it
Yep.
and I didn't sleep that night.
Right.
Not because I was up thinking about it, but because I was up playing it. I played it until breakfast time.
Right. Yeah. Yep. And it's because
But
it,
this,
it it's engaging and it has layers and it's
yeah,
it's rich.
it was a sweet game, and it was like this. It had all the things that, and the reason I'm even going into detail right now is that it was before freemium games. It
Yeah.
was, I think a lot of people who didn't know the Harvest Moon franchise um, probably have it in their mind that things started with Farmville. Farmville came after like the first handful of Harvest Moon games.
Yep.
And so when we go to that, like when that started showing up to be kind of part of the Facebook ecosystem, and what was it, Zynga, was that the name?
Yes.
You know the one I'm talking about.
I
Yeah, they were
do.
sort
Yeah. And it just turned into something that everybody's feeds were getting, inundated with, and everybody's being slapped in the face with this irritating game that nobody really liked, but everybody played.
of so this is a little embarrassing, but I think for the sake of what you're like doing research on, this is
Yeah.
a worthwhile to include. um After we graduated college, I was putting out all these uh, applications and not hearing back from anybody. And around that same time, Mafia Wars was big on Facebook.
Sure.
Oh my goodness. This is embarrassing because I was like drifting into that depressed state where you don't really know what to try next. You want a job, but that wasn't panning out. But Mafia Wars was calling for a lot of my attention, and
Yep.
that was at least something in my life I could level up in.
Yeah.
Um,
There's these low hanging dopaminergic
yes,
rewards.
yes.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get ahead of your questions, but
No, you're
especially
good.
since I work as a counselor now, that is the thing. I think that the fact that it is never more than 3 feet away because your phone is always within arm's reach. At least mine generally is. Like it is kind of a cyborg age that we're living in.
Yeah.
That's just,
And
it's
with
just
so many
not
of these things, there's no beginning, middle, and end, you know?
right. Like pick any platform, you will never find the end of scrolling the feed.
Yep.
There's no such thing as the end of scrolling the feed. People produce content faster than you could even scroll it, and that's kind of incredible to think about. But
Yep.
the fact that it does anything for you in terms of dopamine, and the fact that it's 100% available, like when do you even really have downtime? It's like whatever's stabilizing us emotionally is this lower level of dopamine, which is like the pleasure chemical. It's not the satisfaction chemical. We're not really getting serotonin from this, but we're getting enough to keep the pulse. So anyways, to kind of bring it back, I was playing Mafia Wars. I remember setting my sleep schedule around it. Like I'm remembering getting up at like 3 or 4 in the morning just to log on and use my points. And like for a while that was my life.
Yeah.
Instead of finding gainful employment. I remember, I think you were into this more than I was, like the tycoon style games when we were kids.
Yes.
So like there was one where you basically can build a functioning city. Like it starts taking you through the basics. You have to develop this to this point before you can build this type of building. And so I'm not going to deny that's compelling because, well, heck, even when I was a warehouse janitor, it was interesting to me to have that experience of being able to observe, okay, this is the whole process this warehouse goes through from beginning of an order to shipping that order. It was interesting to me to have the vantage point to just be able to kind of sweep around all day and look sweep right. around the warehouse all day. Oh, wow. Sounds like a different profession.
We're just very popular in the warehouse.
I was known. We'll just say that. Right. No, but it was an interesting part of my job to be able to have an up close look at how all of those parts interrelated. And so I think that's a compelling thing to have in a game. But after a little while, I realized, wow, this is doing to me what Candy Crush did to me. It is becoming what I do whenever I have a spare moment to work on it. And it's not counting for anything in the real world. And I'd like to draw a line between what that was for me and what Harvest Moon 64 was for me, because I loved that game and I still love that game. But the city building one was like, it was habit forming in a way that made me think I was losing an opportunity whenever I was not spending time on the game. And that was false. And eventually I realized it was false. And I realized I could use my life for literally anything else.
Yeah. Sometimes games, they have tons and tons of players, but there's a tiny, tiny fraction of people who are where they get their revenue. And sometimes they're called whales because they spend ungodly amounts of money on these games. Do you think that's just normal market action, or do you think that rises to the level of exploitation?
Oh, geez. It's hard because you asked an ethics question. If the people are telling you what they want and you're giving it to them, you could make the case that you're serving the people's interest. Just the same as it's within the people's rights to go vacationing in Vegas to hit the slot machines.
Yep.
But it's hard because if you're a kid, you're probably asking your parents permission to use their card to pay for whatever you're buying on a freemium game, but probably not in all cases.
Yeah, and you don't have the same understanding that what you're doing is, filling a similar urge that something like gambling fills. You're not as a child.
Yeah.
And even some adults, I think, don't realize what they're doing when they're engaging with this type of media.
Sure, and I was going to say it doesn't hit the same, but no, that's actually the fact. It does hit the same, but you just don't necessarily recognize it as the same thing.
Right. Some games, they limit the amount of play by, you run out of lives, or you've failed the level in Candy Crush too many times, and then they have a timed cooldown, or they let you purchase your way back in. Is that any different in your mind to, what arcades did in the 80s, where you
Oh,
could just put in another quarter? Or does it change it now that they can adapt the game to kind of maximize that profit?
that it's funny because I didn't even think about that. Yeah, like that's kind of the same phenomenon, isn't it? At least in a way, like it's packaged different, but it is kind of the same thing.
Yep.
Yeah, like if I had been a kid who just would go through a sock full of quarters on a weekend, like that would have been probably
Yeah,
kind
like
of
that sucks. I
yeah.
could have found better stuff to do with a sock full of quarters. Do you see an ethical difference between developers offering purchases that affect gameplay, improve your status in the game versus things that are just cosmetic?
So you're saying like is there like a right and wrong to the idea of
Just on the
of
scale of right and wrong, do you see it as, and I know what I think, but do you think that perhaps offering things that people can get that are just nifty and cosmetic are less problematic, for lack of a better word, than things that you may need to shell out money for to be able to progress through the game
uh
better?
see, it's funny because we're talking about it in general terms, and
Sure.
I think I could feel different from one situation to the next if we were talking about how real people
Yep.
in different age categories and
Sure.
different life situations were affected. In general terms, it just kind of seems like a dick move to
Right.
to to make it so that the players who pay on a free to play game are gonna just plain have the upper hand.
So, what do you think about, um, we mentioned games that will allow you to buy your way out of cooldowns. What do you think about the pretty prevalent practice of games that will let you watch an advertisement to move on? Like in
Oh,
theory, it's a little worse for the developer. They don't get quite as much money, but you don't have to shell out any money. But then you're staring at this thing you don't care about for 30 seconds.
oh yeah. Well, I was when it was me, I was just waiting it out. I was
Yeah.
like just looking, wait till I heard the music come back on.
Right.
But yeah, uh, I mean, it's an option.
Yeah.
It's part of our landscape now, which kind of sucks. Like I don't know how old I'm going to be before I stop getting prompted by YouTube to be able to keep playing music with the window closed, on my screen. Like, of course that's cool, but like,
The thing that
how
irritates
many?
me about it is that it's like it's you're wasting time. They're wasting your time by trying to keep you in this thing, and then you could pay for it by having to waste just a little bit more time by doing something that you're not even nominally interested in.
Well, and that's weird, all right, right? Because I mean, I'm not a marketing guru, but it has been an interest over the years, and I've needed to be at least conversationally aware of marketing skills
Sure.
for things that I've been more heavily involved in. So like the kind of the rules of the marketing world have changed a lot since when we were teenagers to now, and yet it seems like those advertisements that you can do instead of paying to unlock the cooldown are the same numbers game that direct mailers used to be.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
right.
And just as irritating.
And just as irritating. It's like those are here because they've calculated that it's going to still be worth it even if a bunch of people tune out,
Yep.
because
It's
some
interesting.
people won't,
Yep.
which
So I guess we
feels
should be thankful to these people who are addicted to these games and apps because in some respect, that's
because
where a
they're
lot of the
literally
pop-ups have gone.
because they're literally supporting
Yeah,
they're standing in the gap for the rest of us.
you're slapping yourself in the face with ads, so we don't have to be.
Yes. And trust me, we don't have to be.
We salute you.
Yes. This was your legacy after all. Hmm. Wow. Yeah, yeah. Imagine somebody's tombstone with like it doesn't even have their name on it. It's just this Candy Crush level 800. It doesn't even have their name. It like has the shapes engraved on it.
My name isn't important.
Remember me. Well, remember this.
So my last question is about randomization of rewards that you can purchase from a lot of these games.
Okay.
So you kind of referenced it earlier when you said, dopamine isn't what we once thought it was a long time ago. We thought it was like a pleasure hormone, but you could call it more of an anticipation hormone, I guess.
Okay.
More about the act of getting than of having.
I see okay, I can appreciate the line you're drawing there.
So it's because of that, regular predictable rewards might give you a little dopamine spike, but when you have randomized rewards and you hit on the good one, if it's 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 times or whatever the magic number is, that gets you a big dopamine spike.
Mm-hmm.
So,
which is the same as the lottery, and for younger people, it was the same as bubblegum machines.
Yeah. So do you think that adds an extra ethical wrinkle when people are selling these upgrades through games to add a random element to it?
It's a good question. I personally don't find that to be as like ethically grimy as the other stuff we talked about.
Sure.
Especially because like,
at least if you understand going into it that's
the key thing. That's the key thing. Like if you know what you're going into, then it like, even though, well, and now I know this is not the heart of what we're talking about, but it's the same thing is involved in like blockchain and NFTs, that they're creating this exclusivity, and some things are just plain rare, and that adds to, it's like it's a weird thing for a lot of people to try to shift perspective into, because at some point, once people are putting that much value on digital assets, it just feels very strange, because it's not like you're owning the one and only Mona Lisa and you can hang it on your wall. It's right. Like this thing that like, well, yeah, like I have this and I know it's mine, but someone could copy a JPEG of the same thing and pass it off as if they're owning it.
Yeah.
And it's not lost on me that it is different, but it's like not everybody at face value is going to recognize the difference.
Yeah. And to take this tangent a bit further, like people will say, an NFT of something that's completely unique, and like, what if you did an NFT of a frame of a movie, like you own frame number 300,247, really cool scene, but it's 24 frames a second times a 3-hour movie.
Yeah.
It's like,
so I don't know.
At some point, it's worthless, not because the thing itself is worthless, but just because there's a limitless number of things.
Oh yeah. Which I mean, like that even raises weird existential questions about the value that you place on a moment.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm having to really hold my tongue because I could take this down a rabbit trail that I don't think has much to do with the main point of the interview.
Sure. I'll beat you to it though and say that I'm looking forward to like after NFTs, when people start selling their soul. I want to be early on that bandwagon before they figure out that they're worthless.
Oh wow. I'm really wondering about the gamification aspect of that. You're like buying a Vibe and it'll come with a whole desktop theme. Oh my. I think I missed, what was the question? Because I don't think I answered the last question.
It was just about the ethical difference between randomized versus non-randomized rewards. I think you answered it well enough. I'm kind
Yeah,
of on
I
the
mean, I
same
guess
page. It's not the worst
I
thing.
guess more or less. I mean, like it, and I spun off into the NFT thing because it's an odd thing, and it's a thing that's unique to our time. But I'm starting to, partly because I was interested in seeing what is going on, I'm starting to sort of get my head around, what it even means that people are placing value on these things, and that much value on these things. Because for the most part, it seems like it's a rich man's game, right?
Yeah.
But and like a Bored Ape Yacht Club, that's what you're branding yourself as when you pick a name like that, and I think they've done quite well for themselves. I think they made a lot of good choices for what they're trying to accomplish, but I am coming around to recognizing, okay, this is a thing people are placing real value on, and I can see that and it's not totally random that they're doing so. So like when I think of making certain things more rare and making it sort of luck of the draw in games, to me that's not much different from in the 90s when a bunch of us were like buying packs of trading cards for whatever the newest Batman movie, Disney movie, or Pokemon for that matter. Pokemon's a good example. It's like, that you're going to end up having 10 of the same card, and it's probably going to be a card none of your friends want to trade with you because they also have 10 of that card. But sometimes you're going to get a foil covered Squirtle or something like that, right? So to me, like it's a way of, it makes it special. It does make it part of the experience. And
sure. I can appreciate
like you said, as long as you know what you're getting yourself into, then I think that's what it hinges on. And to me, it's not so much an ethical situation outside of that.
It reminds me of the episode of SpongeBob SquarePants where they're trying to collect the rare Mermaid Man cards, and eventually SpongeBob gets a pack of 5 cards, and it's all 5 of the rare Mermaid Man cards.
I never saw that one.
It's so good, and it's got a hologram on it. and when he looks at it, the hologram is just Mermaid Man, and there's like an explosion in the background, and he's going, "Buy more cards." He plays it again. Buy more cards. So good.
That's a weird kick in the face. That has a delayed effect on me just now. It's like, wow, all this is like, if there's like no more ultimate payoff, while at the same time making it suddenly seem incredibly cheap.
Right.
Wow.
And it's kind of a microcosm of what's happening with all of it.
Like there was like Tim and Eric's $1 billion movie. there was this whole thing where the premise was that they were, I guess you'd say, sponsored by this billionaire to make a $1 billion movie. And you find out quickly what all their expenses were going to, and one of the many expenses was to just buy an enormous amount of diamonds, big ones. And at one point later in the movie, Eric proposes to this girl that he falls in love with and puts one of these freaking big honking diamonds on her finger, and Tim goes, "Oh, here, Eric, where'd you get that diamond?" "Oh, I got it from the from the shipment that we got when we were making the movie." And Tim's like, "Oh yeah, I got a whole bunch of them diamonds too." It kills me.
So stupid.
For frame of reference, it was almost like having my mug on top of my finger. Yeah, just this giant honking rock. So funny. Yeah.
All right.
So it's like it's not real, but at the same and here's what I guess we didn't really talk about this. But I think because of gaming being what it is, this matters. It is part of the immersion. And you might remember back in, I think it was still the 90s. It was one of the Star Wars games that got big online. People were like really developing the character they were playing as and then actually selling the character for real money.
Yeah, I vaguely recall that.
I don't remember if it was Knights of the Old Republic or if it was different. It wasn't one that I played, but I remember it being big. And I remember taking note that was an interesting phenomenon. Like this is something people are putting real world value on. And so I think it's important for people to recognize what they're vulnerable to. I'm not comfortable with people exploiting other people's vulnerabilities, but it's still hard for me to assign a moral value to it. Maybe because
right, and there's no firm line there either. You know, hunger is kind of a vulnerability. You know, people sell food. You know?
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, we can see the differences between that and people exploiting a personality disorder or what have you. But I take your point.
Yeah. But that's just to say, you know, I think that the making certain things rare and all stuff like that. It's like, it'd be funny to be talking with a non-gamer about this stuff because I have a feeling the opinions would be much more polarized and they wouldn't know what it was like.
They wouldn't, right? They wouldn't get it.
And because it does become kind of like, well, I mean, how many people will buy stuff at the merch table when they go to see a live band?
Right.
And that's not even to imply that people won't. It's just to say there's a kind of person that will want to identify with someone that they follow because they follow them for a specific reason. They resonate with something that matters to them. It's a lifestyle brand in their eyes. And I think the same is true in the world of gaming. It becomes immersive for a reason. I've said before, you know, it wouldn't hit the same if you were exploring Hyrule as Barney the dinosaur. There's a reason that we enjoy doing it as Link.
Yeah.
All of this stuff is designed. It's not designed randomly, and it's not all designed for exploitation. It's like, I mean, you go back to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, and it's like all of this stuff comes down to, not all of it, but good games that should be called games. They take you somewhere.
Yeah.
They resonate for a reason. Heck, I mean, in the last 5 years, we've seen so many things that even take you on like a psychological journey. Like it has become a valid art form that even has a space in the Smithsonian. You know, it when it's done right and not done well. No, and this is interesting because I don't have an analogy in mind for this at the moment, but I think it's important to have one. There's a difference between I didn't think I was going to take it in this direction, but there's a difference between having sex and making love. You know, it's like there's a difference between having a relationship and having a casual hookup. And I think maybe that does kind of drive at the difference. It's like, well, yeah, it's your right to do what you want to do, but what is this going to get you? Yeah. And is it just going to be feeling alive for a few minutes? You know, like what kind of life do you want to live? Do you want to get to the end of your 30s and look back on like how high your Candy Crush level was?
Yeah.
Is that all that you have to carry forward with you?
It's not nothing.
but so, and that's funny for me because, like, I mentioned identifying as more of a relativist, and because not because of that, but within that, it just, I don't think it's as useful to look at things in terms of right and wrong, because people don't agree about what right and wrong is. But you can always look at the fruit of something. And, I used to work in a substance use treatment center. And I think one of the biggest challenges for most people who go through that system, and most people who do go through it more than once, there's a real challenge in the addicted mind having enough perspective to see outside of the moment that they are in. And in my mind, we generally spend our energy on one of two things, and that's either seeking relief or some kind of development, be it personal development or building something with someone else in mind or with community in mind. I think we're either building or we're seeking comfort. And so that's as close, I think that's as close as I get to making a directly moral issue out of it, because the fruit of it, because you have to look at the fruit of what's happening. If the fruit of it is just to lock someone into a moment so that all they're doing is trying to navigate that moment, but if their options are already pre-programmed, that to just get them to open their wallet in order to manage that moment so they could get to the next moment and do the same thing.
Yeah.
That's greasy.
Yeah, it's well said.
Thank you. I meant every word.
Good. So that leads me to two questions, one real and one fake. I'll leave it to you to decide which is which.
Okay.
On the topic of moral relativism.
Yeah.
So somewhere in your last answer, I determined that you feel like it's okay for people to sell fake people for real money. What about selling real people for fake money? Any difference?
Is this a real question?
No, that was the fake question.
And yet it was supposed to prime you for something else.
No, so
I'm just like digging a bit deeper into the implications of what you asked me.
I'm not sure how it would work. I just wonder whether it would be wrong to you.
Oh, wow. Welcome to America.
Excuse me. So I think this might be a good question to kind of take things away from the realm of ethics and more into the realm of what would personally concern you. If you had a child, would you have concerns just letting them run free with the freemium games that interested them?
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting. That's a good question. That's a really good question. Yeah.
Because I remember when we were kids, a lot of adults were concerned about the amount of video games that we would play and other children would play, but it seems like with these tools that game makers have, it feels to me like it's a little different.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it was different, like, the place I used to go to rent games was not far from where you lived. You probably remember it.
Yep.
I think it changed names a couple of times, but Movie Mania, it was near the Price Chopper, or at least near where the Price Chopper
wasn't it?
Actually, no. But it was close to Blockbuster. It was near there. Um, I remember I used to like get a game there. Super Mario RPG. I remember when that was brand new and it was the
I
coolest
love
thing I
that game.
ever saw.
Yeah.
It's still celebrated as one of like the perfect games
Yeah.
that
I
have been
still, I
made.
still play it from time to time. It's
Oh, that's awesome. I
excellent.
did a playthrough of that like a month or two ago.
Yeah.
It's
It's
such
crazy
a
how quickly, now that we're crafty older people, how quickly you can go through it compared to when you were,
oh, I
a
know, I
teenager.
know, I know. I couldn't believe. Of course, now when I go through it, I'm listening to podcasts the whole time.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I was surprised at how fast I made my way through it. Of course, when you can like do a save state whenever you want to and not have to repeat a whole ton of content.
Yeah.
But
That's a sidebar too. How amazing is that?
oh, I
Playing
know.
games while you're listening to content. I used to do that when I was a kid. You might remember listening to NPR
Oh
all the
yeah,
time.
yeah. That's what you were the one who got me into NPR. Yeah.
Yep.
Which is funny. I still listen to your local NPR station on
Yeah.
my phone. It just forced a habit. I just have the app.
But even if you're playing something kind of mindless and regrettable, at least you might be listening to something you enjoy.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. There's something nice about it. It's I'm not even sure why it works the way that it does, but I like that a lot. I'm kind of losing what the question was.
Would you let your brat
Oh, my
play
brat.
these games?
Yeah, it's about my brat. Yeah, that's a tough one because I see a lot of that in different perspective now than I would have then. Um, and like the way that I sucker punch my clients now that I work in counseling, this is bad to say it that way, but like, so like
The way you
sometimes,
physically beat your clients, I'm
yeah, when I
assuming.
physically, when I'm a virtual therapist, so there's not even the option, but it's the problems that people will go through, whether it's depression or whatever it is, a lot of times that'll lead to a kind of disconnectedness, and I think that starts as a disconnectedness from others and then becomes a disconnectedness like within themselves. And so the tricky thing is, and I see it in myself too. This is just common for humans, I think. Like it's easy for yourself to be the last person you'll have compassion for.
Yeah.
And that sucks, but it just kind of is that way. So the way that I sort of circumnavigate that is once my clients have developed enough rapport and trust with me that they've kind of shared some of what is kind of keeping them down, keeping them feeling stuck, I will ask them to look at their problem or their childhood as if it were happening to their own child and not
To
to
someone
them.
they were taken care of, right?
Yeah, and see, would you like look? Does any protective instinct rise up within you if you think about this happening to your own 9-year-old and not to you, because you're in a place where you're not a real person to yourself anymore.
Yep.
And maybe that's because you felt like you were treated invisibly back then, but that is to say that really does make it a lot more real. And so, like, would I let my own kids play? You're specifically asking about freemium games?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these types of games where you know what they're doing.
Right.
They're
That's
trying to get them to play all day long for nothing.
That's a funny one for me. I'm less inclined to have that just be. I'm less inclined to let my own kids do that. But
so you're mean dad.
Yeah, because I'd be a mean dad.
Right.
But part of that is because in hindsight, I see so much of, probably especially in my teen years.
Yeah.
But I saw so much of my childhood, home life, veer more in the direction of just being on autopilot.
Mhm.
It's hard to say because like you get into puberty in your teen years and you are kind of trying to seek autonomy, you're trying to
Yeah.
identify with peers, you're learning how to be a more sociable creature.
Yeah.
So I don't know
But
how much could have been different in terms of like strong family bonds, but I know that there's a reason for generations now we've called the TV the babysitter,
yeah.
and even more so with the smartphone or tablets. So for me, it would almost, that would just be one detail of many that I would want to, I'd want to make it normal in my house for them not to be the most interesting thing going on.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And not just because of the immediate well-being, but because of the, potential developmental issues.
Developmental issues. And since we didn't say it outright, this is a good time to say, like, yeah, you're in your like mid 20s by the time you by then you look like a fully grown, developed human being, but you're in your mid 20s by the time your brain is finished
Yeah.
developing. The only thing is, even though neural pathways are fairly forgiving if you're intentional with restructuring your neural pathways, neuroplasticity is a thing, thankfully. um, it's still a thing that you can condition from a very young age, and the first 5 years of your life are going to tend to set the tone and the structure for what the rest of your life is going to unfold as. So if you're already, basically, it's always going to be easier to fly down a 6-lane superhighway than it is to fly down a bumpy, rocky dirt road that's fallen out of use. So if you're practicing going to some kind of freemium game and that's maybe your biggest buzz in life, then you're kind of teaching yourself to live that way. And not to go too deep into, but we might as well, because this is totally about what you're talking about. Well, I think one of the first things we learned when we were studying substance abuse in my counseling program was, it's a really difficult thing to come back from once you're, not only the physical deterioration of the brain once you start, doing stuff like heroin, which is no pun intended, sobering to watch, because it's like actual visible deterioration of your gray matter, and it's kind of scary to look at the pictures. But there's this the term anhedonia, which if you're including this in any of the final research, everybody knows the word hedonism is from the same root. Anhedonia is this idea of not being able to experience pleasure.
Yeah.
So you have a baseline for pleasure, and that's what's normal. And you don't see kids needing to do whippets before they go out and play tag with their friends, because they're just on, and they're able to show up. Their hearts are awake, their emotions are in good balance. As long as they're not taking a bunch of sugar, they're probably in a fairly balanced state. Kids are pretty resilient for a good while before things go off the rails, it seems like. But the more you do extreme things for dopamine, the more that changes what your baseline state is for pleasure, for experiencing pleasure. And so it's not really any wonder why you have to do more and more to get the same high, because not only does it take more to get higher, but the more you train yourself to do that, the more your baseline shifts. And so so it gets to where it's harder to enjoy just being, or that's where mindfulness or meditation can be a more intimidating thing to even attempt, because it's because you can get yourself so far from any state of being that could be considered natural.
Again, I appreciate you taking time to talk. I've enjoyed the chat.
Yeah, me too. I'm
if
glad
we
we
can
found
wrap
the
it
time
up-
to work.
If we can wrap it up in the next 20 seconds, you get 100 points.
Oh,
So
okay.